happy here to be joined by Aidan Jonah. Aidan is the editor-in-chief and the founder of the Canada Files, a socialist, anti-imperialist news publication, who has just recently passed their one-year anniversary, and has been attracting voices and writers and readers from all across the Canadian left. Aidan, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thanks a ton. It's great to be on with you.
Aidan, I'm interested to know, first of all, like how you got interested in leftist politics and where that passion for politics started in your life.
Yeah, it's totally fair. I would have to say basically that in terms of interest, really, I think it came around. I'd always kind of been politically interested. Basically, when I was younger, right, I came from a fairly like left liberal family, so I didn't really know any better. So I volunteered a little bit for the Liberal Party when I was maybe like 15. So that was kind of when I became
Right.
somewhat politically aware. Then over the next few years, I kind of drifted more towards like the NDP side, and it was like grade 12 was the year when Doug Ford put a lot of the cuts to education,
Yeah.
and that came down. So basically, that was when I kind of got involved politically, really. I started to do, I founded like a student group, Students Against Public Education Cuts. I think at its peak, there's 24 chapters across the province. And so that was kind of when I got into the political, I guess, left, really, I'd say, because I was already on the left, but I actually started to get an activist involved around then.
Yeah, so it's funny when you go back to like the 2015 election, you're talking about like volunteering with the Liberals, because in that election, you could almost argue that the Liberals were like further to the left than the NDP were at that time around with Mulcair and the platform Trudeau was running off of. That's really interesting.
Yeah, no, Mulcair was definitely an utter train wreck.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, yeah, he really was just an utter train wreck. Like the fact that the NDP could allow the Liberals to ever run to the left of them was an indication of really utter failure.
And obviously, it's not like the Liberals governed from the left whatsoever. They just
No,
ran on
no, of course
ideas of
not.
pharmacare and proportional representation and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, for sure not. And obviously, I'm not really an NDP person anymore, but
No, of course.
I'll give you credit. They're slightly more to the left than the Liberals.
Oh, surely. Yeah, no, I understand. No, and I'm interested, like, so I first, obviously, heard about you, obviously. I know, like, we go to the same school and everything, but because I was researching student publications and I found the Canada Files, and I was quite interested in it, because I'm fairly left-leaning, I want to write for you. But I'm interested, like, what drove you to start the Canada Files, because you were a first-year student, weren't you?
Yeah, that's right. So I guess I would say the major thing there really, it was just that I had kind of tried to go and work through with the eye opener to a certain degree. I had actually even gone to cover like a little climate event.
Right.
And I just didn't have a great time in terms of the editors there. And also, I still remember this still bugs me to this day. I was told that I needed to change the wording around something around climate change because not everyone believed it. Believed it. I got told this through the Google edits that they made. And anyways, that piece never actually ended up getting published. Funny enough, because I don't think it was just because they didn't want to publish it, but they just totally forgot about the piece. And at that point, I kind of started to consider my other options because obviously I was irritated at that point. And so I'd already kind of wanted to write about, I knew what I wanted to write about, basically. I always saw myself already as an inherently political person, and I had considered for a time going into politics, but I looked at academia, took one look at it, and said absolutely not.
Right.
So yeah, basically writing about politics was always kind of going to be where I went, and so I'd say that was the founding basis for it. And then eventually, I honestly just put it together. Just took some time over a few weeks to kind of set everything up, and then started from there. Really, it was late November. Yeah, it was late November when it was founded. So.
I would love to hear your take on this because this is something that I think about quite a bit because obviously we're both in the same program. I'm a third year and you're second year, right?
Yep.
When I was in first and second year, they talked to us a lot about like guest lecturers and even like my own profs talked to us a lot about how we should be keeping our social medias like apolitical. Like we shouldn't be posting politics on our social medias and stuff because that could hinder us from getting future jobs or something. And I'm interested, like, if you ever heard that in your first couple of years. But I remember, like, as a first year, I was really terrified to post anything political at all because I thought that was like taboo or something in journalism. And I'd love to like hear your take on that. Like, what do you feel about like that sort of the way that journalism at Ryerson is taught in that way?
I don't know if I was ever kind of really taught in that way. I feel
Oh,
like
really?
there definitely was some hints about that, but for me, I just never really cared about that. I kind of always knew where I stood on these issues, and I wasn't gonna have anybody try to shut me down there. Realistically, the way I always thought about it, to me at least, is like especially in terms of like this journalism, you basically you have essentially 4 years, right?
Right.
Where you're just learning, focusing, and building out your platform. So you actually have a significant amount of time. Or if you immediately go find your focus, find your where you're going, and you stick to your guns, you actually have a lot of time to develop this stuff. Like for example, for me, it's basically been probably like a year, and obviously it's been a year and a few months since I got into the program, and I've already been able to build up the kind of files to what it is at this point. So like basically, I think it's a few things kind of drive that fear, which is, I mean, it's legitimate. It really does depend on what you want to do, because if people see themselves as the journalist, the apolitical, neutral, I don't believe in any of that, but
CBC,
that kind of journalist, basically, then I can somewhat rationalize. I can see how they'd rationalize that, but I see that as an incredibly problematic teaching, because I think everything is political. In my opinion, journalism is inherently an activist role, and basically, so you have basically the media picking what people, essentially what stories they think people should care about, what stories that are the most important, and also the media, a lot of it, what it does is basically it lies or misleads by omission.
Right.
And so basically that's an inherently activist role. That's an inherently political role. And so it's always kind of almost borderline hilarious when you have people saying, oh, don't be outwardly political. Because that's the whole thing, is that basically it's meant to be kept inward. It's meant that people don't grasp that it's political. And so I'm just not a fan of that kind of way of thinking, really. I mean, I didn't ever really have that pressed on me that hard, but I mean, I feel like people in my year probably also had a different experience with that.
Yeah, probably. And I mean, it's interesting because yeah, no, I think you bring up really good points there about politicizing yourself. And obviously, if you're trying to be like, politics are allowed to a certain degree in journalism, but if you're writing from a centrist point of view in like normal society, that's just like classic neoliberal opinions. Like, you're not,
Yeah.
like, default doesn't necessarily mean apolitical, even though people think it does. And obviously, like, like you and I are both like, or at least I'm not gonna assume anything, but like you and I are both like white and fairly privileged, I'm guessing, in like the grand scheme of things. And I've always felt that like lots of those rules in journalism are kind of meant for people like me. Like, they're meant to be good for like white men, and they really like are exclusionary to minorities in lots of ways, because um like a Black Lives Matter protest isn't political. That's someone's life. You know what I'm saying? So it's so strange for me to be like, oh yeah, like you can't post about this on social media or anything like that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I think there's a piece by Pacinte Matar, I believe it was. I think it was in the Walrus or the Narwhal, one of the two. But
Yeah.
basically did a great, like, there's a lot of great writing on it about basically how, this really is, this concept tends to be weaponized against basically people who really aren't white and don't have basically the level of privilege that we do. So, no, I think I can definitely agree with you on that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Just to like move topics a little bit, where did the name for the Canada Files come from? What's that a reference to?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I found it came from, I had listened to the Empire Files by Abby Martin. And so basically that was where the inspiration for the name really came
I'm
from.
not familiar with the Empire Files. What is that?
So it's kind of like a left anti-imperialist, basically kind of podcast, and kind of like she does videos as well. Basically, like she was on Telly Soar for a few years, I think. So it's basically left anti-imperialist content, kind of focused on those fronts. So
yeah, that's where the name was inspired from. Just
I would say so, yeah, basically. I mean, in terms of like my journalistic inspiration, I'd say the gray zone is probably the inspiration I would probably cite
Hmm.
the most, really. But in terms of the name, I would say basically, yeah, it's got to be the Empire Files. That was where the kind of the inspiration came from.
Did you expect to see the level of popularity around your publication that you have right now from the beginning?
No, not really, honestly. I don't think the focus was as tight in the beginning, really. Um, it was kind of more of a mix of activism, some foreign policy, some basically more like even mainstream kind of coverage. It didn't really acquire as much discipline in its content until maybe like February, March. It was really once the pandemic hit
Hmm.
and basically everything was forced into that I had to kind of grapple with, okay, I can't just cover a ton of events or can't cover a ton of these things. Basically, what is this going to look like now? And eventually that's how I fell onto foreign policy. Um, but yeah, no, at the start, no, I don't think I really had any expectation of it getting to this point. Really, no, no, I didn't actually.
What do you think it says that it has become so popular? There obviously is a want or a yearning for like leftist political content in Canada.
Yeah, I think so, and I think particularly on like the foreign policy front, I think people are starting to actually get a grasp of what our foreign policy really is and what it's really all about. So, in a way, looking back in with hindsight, it doesn't surprise me that it's grown as well as it really has. But I would say that I think a lot of it came from the fact that left media just didn't cover foreign policy that well,
Hmm.
and I still don't think a lot of them cover it the best. I mean, there's some that cover it decently well, I'd say, but basically the whole thing of the KFLs really is the daily coverage of it. It's trying to keep an eye on it every day, and I think that's something extremely unique. So, like in like the present day, the success doesn't surprise me in a way, but I think that only comes with basically, and I say success in a relative manner, but basically being where I'm now, like I know why I'm there. There isn't like a doubt, a kind of doubt complex or whatever. I'm like confident in the work I'm doing, but yeah, it definitely wasn't the way at the beginning. So that took time to kind of gain that.
How did you did do all the people who write for you, did they reach out to you, or did you reach out to anyone to ask them to write columns or pieces or anything? Be
I
in
think
original.
early on I did a fair bit of reaching out. I think you have to when you start, and I'd say from that point of on, at that point it was kind of more of a mix. Basically, like you always got to reach out if you know someone's good at writing, but sometimes decent amount of time people will reach out, want to write themselves. It's a real mix. It's a real mix, obviously.
How do you want to grow the website or the brand or the publication or anything like that in the future?
Well, I think a lot of it is basically trying to build like the newsletter, build social media followings, but also a lot of it is trying to basically actually gain financial support
Hmm.
from people. That's the biggest thing. Is basically that right now, obviously, can't pay writers. I can't really pay myself either. So that's the thing. Basically, that if this wants to become a long-term thing, basically there needs to be financial support there. Because if you can get that support, then I think basically there absolutely is. Like this could go on for a very, very, very long time. But it'll just depend on whether the financial support comes over
Right.
time. So
Do you have a Patreon?
yeah, I do actually. Yeah.
How do you work that? Like, how do you like to have like exclusive like how does that work?
So in terms of the Patreon, so obviously there's the Patreon for the Canada Files, which is meant to be focused on writers and contributors.
Hmm.
And then I have a personal Patreon, which obviously would just be going to me. Just to try to have a separation there because ideally basically the Patreon would just go there and it's just a simpler setup. But in terms of the gifts and all that stuff, basically, so yeah, there is obviously kind of special offers or special things basically that come with the different levels of rewards. Um, Yeah, so for example, like in the Canada Files, the Patreon, it's like if there's like a $5 reward tier, you'll get a shout out at the end of videos. Like I don't know, let me look here, basically. Like for example, like in the past, there was a podcast called I think it was Settlers Brave Space that
Yeah.
we used to run. Basically, like you would get digital downloads of that podcast. Basically, if you did that, if you basically support it at $10 a month. So there's obviously a variety of things and rewards you can kind of offer where you're not shutting out people that basically don't pay for it right now, but you're also basically making sure that people have an incentive to financially support the site. So
Yeah, it's hard. I feel like, I mean, this is the issue with all journalism right now, obviously, is that like money just like is hard to it's hard to monetize journalism at this point. Um
oh yeah, that's the most brutal part of it really, is basically that I think there's an interest in left journalism, but there's a problem that I think that you have I think basically that it's an extremely rough time financially right now. So like that's the number
right.
one thing is it's just
Yeah.
not a good time anytime. But even before COVID, basically, yeah, it is really tough to monetize these things. It's definitely something worth pushing for, but yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, it's hard. And obviously it's not just like I feel like almost all publications except for like the massive ones. And even they say that they're struggling, but I doubt they're struggling that much to be honest, but like are having a little bit of a hard time making I don't know. I think journalism itself is also in a little bit of a transition period probably between different styles and with like the internet and everything, different ways of monetizing and different ways of making content and stuff, which is gonna we'll see. Um, because currently it seems like lots of journalism companies aren't doing great or aren't doing as well as they want to be doing.
Yeah, 100% there. It really is basically quite a fascinating period in journalism as a whole, really. Yeah, things are changing. Things really are changing, and they're changing remarkably fast in this kind of industry right now. It's definitely interesting. You see a lot of like left media has popped
Mm-hmm.
up, I'd say, in the past like 10 years in particular, and I think that a lot of that is because of the internet and because of like social media kind of making that possible. But yeah, no, I'd say when you say a transitional period, that's a really good way to put it because we don't really know what the end point is going to be right now.
What do you attribute the boom in leftist and socialist content to, other than like obviously I think the internet has a big part to play in that. um TikTok and YouTube and everything I think have a big part to play in radicalization of people. But what do you feel about like is there anything political you think has happened that has made people more interested in these ideas in the last 10 years than they probably were in the previous 20 or so?
Well, I'd say basically you have basically obviously Occupy Wall Street in
Mm-hmm.
like the early 2010s. You had, I think, Quebec student strike. You had basically really you had Indigenous solidarity kind of
Mm-hmm.
grow a ton during 2012, that period. And then I guess you'd say probably with the Mulcair leadership, basically kind of got people who were social democrats at the time to kind of start to question that for the first time, really. And so maybe, I guess going from there, you have basically the pipeline, you have Trudeau kind of selling out people, or which I mean, really it's exactly zero surprise, but something like that happening might be a key point for radicalization. But I'd say getting back to the bigger point of hand in terms of social media and stuff, I think basically that is a key point for radicalization. And I guess I would bring people to the left. Like for me, like I remember learning about Palestine and like learning
Mm-hmm.
about a lot of these occurrences in the world, really. Basically, I wouldn't have learned about those if it wasn't for social media. So I think basically that's a big reason why you have basically like governments and a lot of these kind of like neoliberal basically figures trying to like clamp down on social media is because it's kind of one of those areas where people can escape like the bubble and the mainstream media bubble that'll just protect like our system at all costs, basically, and give people a chance to really learn about the world. Obviously, there's a risk of misinformation, but there's a huge opportunity for people to learn and to move to the left online.
Yeah, no, Palestine advocacy is definitely something that pushed me to the left. I think for a long time this sounds almost funny, but I was maybe like 16 or so. So this was a grain of salt. But, like, I would call myself a liberal, but then I like fundamentally believed in, like, I was pro Palestine, and I was like really big about BDS, and I was like everything. And then I realized that liberals didn't advocate for those things. I just didn't understand what the words meant. Like, I realized that really, even though I called myself a liberal for so long, all the policies and stuff that I advocated for with like pharmacare and even like electoral reform and things like that were all, and like development of the third world, which is really big to me, were all being championed by leftists, not by liberals. And I think that Palestine was like a big realization for me that, like, oh, liberals don't necessarily, like, they're not on my side with this. I think I might be wrong about what I, like, who I need to be. And that was a big part, like, radicalizing me for sure. Radicalize might be the wrong word, but certainly in terms of pushing me further to the left.
Yeah, for sure. Ironically, I think must have been in a fairly similar situation because I had a similar thing where, like, I don't think I ever saw myself as a liberal, basically, when I was young. But I always kind of saw myself relatively. I guess I started as, like, the best way I'd put it is like a very mild, like, social democrat was where I started when I was maybe like
Yeah, same
that
problem.
kind of 15, 16 age. And, like, yeah, I guess it really was at a certain point, like, basically you break through the cognitive dissonance of supporting some of these causes like Palestine, supporting them, and basically then you realize that basically you don't support it. Like,
Yeah.
people don't, the liberals or like even the NDP don't support it.
No,
Like,
yeah.
the cognitive dissonance around the NDP was the toughest one to break through, really, because basically it's like they're the left party. They're supposed to be the left party. Everyone tells you they're the left party, but then you see basically that maybe other than Matthew Green, Leah Gazan, and I think one or two other MPs, really, they don't support Palestine, basically.
Yeah.
And, like, a lot of these key issues, basically, that the people on the left think they support, it's basically like you then go about and you're still supporting basically and still pushing for the party that is working exactly against a lot of the aims that many on the left are trying to get. So
Yeah, it's a hard, I mean, obviously the NDP, I think, has been has thrown itself around quite a bit since Tommy Douglas, obviously. Um and is at a point where I don't really know. I mean, I personally advocate quite a bit for like leftist unity, and I think that even that can include social democrats. And I think that's still important. But I definitely agree with you that, like, the NDP stances on many things are not what I wish they would be.
yeah, I know. Look, I don't have a problem with, like, left unity in a way, but I think also that left unity shouldn't be a replacement for left debate
Oh,
and left
absolutely. I
discussion
agree.
either. And I think I find that a lot of the times there's people like kind of like certain social democrats on the left that basically don't want the debate to be anything more than reaffirming that the party is great. And basically, this is what I'm talking about, cognitive dissonance. So, look, there's definitely room for unity, and I think there definitely is a need for that on a lot of these things. But I think, yeah, I think a discussion is critical one is never a bad thing.
Oh no, I agree 100%. I think that people, I think you're right. I think there's a balance to it. I think that some people want to um ostracize people who have the same short-term goals as them. Um, but I also agree 100% that, like, you should be like posturing your opinions, and like obviously there's like the NDP for the most part not being pro-Palestine for me is unacceptable. Like, for me, that's um something that I fundamentally care about a lot. And I think that the apartheid that's going on in Palestine and Israel, like by the Israeli government, is reprehensible. Um, but I think that on other issues, like, you need to make coalitions with social democrats to, like, move
Oh yeah,
forward.
for
Yeah.
sure, like for sure. I think one of the things I do want to have in terms of like the end, I basically I trade that didn't really get much coverage. So obviously first of all, I should mention the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is really problematic because basically it conflates supporting basically the Palestinian struggle against apartheid
Right.
with basically being anti-Semitic,
Right.
which is a huge problem. Like, you look at the smears that happened against Corbyn, you look at the smears that happened against Bernie. Basically,
Yeah.
these are all based on the same logic, right? And so you have this IHRA working group that basically has MPs and figures from all across the world, basically trying to force Twitter and Facebook to apply the definition on their platforms, which would basically censor a large majority of the left and kind of crush any like debate and issue that you're talking about there. And so basically you have NDP MP Randall Garrison, who has a long record of basically supporting Israeli apartheid, of visiting Israel multiple times, going on these trips to the Knesset, basically touring around, basically. And so he basically is on this committee. Like, he is playing an active part in basically trying to force Twitter and Facebook to apply the definition of anti-Semitism on the platform. And then basically you have really nobody in the party being willing to speak up on this issue. Like, the irony is basically he's essentially, if you think about it, really, he's working to censor his other, like, he's working to censor like Matthew Green. He's working to censor Alea Gazan, basically, because they would get censored from the platform, basically, if they said half of what they said about basically Netanyahu and they said about Israeli apartheid. And then you have them say nothing. And like, I wrote about like this, like an article. I wrote about that with the NDP. Basically, it's like, okay, I mean, like, what do you stand for? Like, do you actually like support Palestine? Do you support these things, or is it more like, look, I don't doubt that Matthew Green, or I don't doubt that Leah Gazan, I don't doubt that they support Palestine, but when you aren't willing to challenge basically a member of your own party that's trying to essentially stifle any talk about Palestine, to me, it's quite disturbing. So.
No, I would agree with you. In general, I really like Leah Gazan and Matthew Green, and there's other NDP MPs who I like Mimlak Kak as well quite a bit. I like, I mean, there's lots of them who I think are or a couple of them who I think are quite good. But I agree with you for sure on that point. Do you think that's the future of Palestinian discourse? Do you think that's going to become more common in the next couple of years around these smear campaigns? Because I feel like I don't think I really realized how much traction the claims of being pro-Palestine, being an anti-Semitic position was until this year, I think. And this is the first year I ever really realized, when everything happened with Corbyn and even with like Bernie, was the first time I ever really realized how successful some of these smear campaigns of calling pro-Palestinian supporters anti-Semites were. Do you think that's kind of going to be more common going forward?
Well, I think it's basically going to be, I think there's a high chance it's a very common thing. I mean, like, you look at the, for example, you look at the IHRA, basically that definition, it got passed in Ontario recently. And you had the Ontario, the ONDP basically not opposing that at all. Basically, they actually refused to vote against it. I was in the NDP, the provincial NDP Spin Fort York Riding Association. And so we had these chats basically at the executive meetings around like the second reading of the bill, basically Bill 168. And so there was this chat, and there's a very, very clear direction that basically there was to be nothing said about the bill. The bill was to be ignored, that, they wouldn't push it through, basically. And it was just such a frustrating thing, because you could see how much of an imminent danger basically conflating like basically Palestine solidarity with anti-Semitism is. But you have basically the UNDP basically not taking it seriously in the slightest, and then you have someone like Joel Harden, basically, who's one of the, I'd say, few solid MPPs within the UNDP, really. And so he actually stood up against it. He resisted it, and he got punished. He got given a really hard time by basically Horvath, the UNDP leader there. And so basically, it's quite concerning, because you have, I mean, it isn't surprising to me now that I've kind of gotten to the political point where I am, but I remember at the time it was quite a shock, because you think basically the NDP would be standing with Palestine. You think the NDP even would support these kind of things, but instead you have the party actively kind of just laying down and letting these things happen. Like, that seems to be the biggest pattern, like especially in the NDP and the left, is basically that you kind of say you support these things, at the end of the day, basically when these things get pushed through, you don't do anything to stop them. At that point, what good is nice words and stuff?
Are you worried that like we could look at a future where the Liberals and the NDP are um really not different at all? Do you think that's where we're going? Do you think that might be where the party is going?
Well, I don't have faith in Jagmeet Singh's leadership, to be brutally honest. I mean, I didn't like Mulcair. I'm not a fan of Singh either. But um, the way I see with the NDP is they're never going to be willing to truly challenge like capital. They're never going to be really truly willing to do that and deal with like capital strikes and a lot of these tools that capital will use to try to crush even mild social democracy. So the way I see it with the NDP is maybe you'll be able to push them a tiny bit left, maybe a tiny bit, but you're not going to get the key things you want. You're not going to really be able to move the party that far. And I mean, because of the parliamentary kind of system we have, it's not even like, for example, I think like the squad are like basically the actions of the squad have been thoroughly inadequate in the United States. Like I think basically they haven't done enough
Sorry,
with
say
the
that one
power
more
that they
time. I
have.
missed. I didn't hear what you said.
Sorry, yeah, sure. Let me say again. So basically, the problem with the political system we have is basically that the leader can basically just choose to boot out members at any time, right?
Right.
So basically, it's tough for even like basically some of the more like left leaning of the Social Democrat NDP figures, basically like Matthew Green or Leah Gazan, basically to kind of push out and do what the squad's done, basically because yeah, they can get booted out at any time. And then you have basically, for example, even like if they manage to do what the squad did, basically I still think I just in the end of the day, I just don't think the NDP has what it takes to kind of win at the end of the day, because I think the bureaucracy and a lot of the party is so inherently structured basically to, like, you look at the BC NDP, right? Basically,
Right.
they are definitely to the left of the former Liberals, but I mean, really, they've replaced the Liberals. They're just slightly
Yeah, the
a
liberal, and
little bit to the
also
left of the Liberals, but then you look at the BC NDP, Wet'suwet'en, you look at them refusing to basically cancel rent, a lot of these things that activists have wanted for very good reason. And so you have a case where they kind of are replacing the Liberals to a certain degree. So
I
do
think
I think
so.
like the party bureaucracy and the figures within the party would want that? I think they might. Do I think the membership wants it? No.
Yeah, I think that BC's provincial politics are definitely testament to the fact that regardless of the party names, we get the same conservative liberal approach to neoliberalism. When you have like BC liberals are quite conservative. Um, I know that like the Liberal Party themselves have quite a, like the Federal Liberal Party have quite a problem when BC liberals try to switch over to federal politics because they're quite they're quite a bit even more conservative than like the Federal Liberal Party is. But yeah, no, it's I agree with you. I think that the it was hard. I mean, I understand like why it happened obviously, but it is still hard to see Jagmeet Singh endorsing like the NDP leader in BC, and I don't know. It's hard to with like Wet'suwet'en, and I don't know. It just it's I don't even know what I'm trying to say right now, but it's like conflicting ideas. It's rough to see for me at least.
Sure. Yeah. No. No doubt there. I mean, like the Wet'suwet'en, I think was also one of the key points where I'd kind of started to really, really question the party. Was basically, like I looked at, and even like you have Green basically or Gazan basically saying, "Oh, Trudeau, how dare you?" And then it's like you have an NDP provincial leader. Like,
Yeah.
hello, hello. It's like go after Horgan. He's the one letting this happen. He could stop this. Um, so yeah, no, it's one of those frustrations there. It really is just in general, like, to be honest, like I'm no longer in the party, and I think
Sure.
for me the reason why is just because the NDP in the way it seems to work, it really is just that basically they say nice things and then they don't get it done. They don't
Right.
actually work for it really. At the end of the day.
And obviously like the I'd say like the general Canadian population who's not super involved in politics, but are like think of themselves as progressive or whatever, probably aren't voting NDP anyway for various reasons. But like what I mean is that I think that there's I think that the NDP is in a bad position on like the political spectrum or whatever, because I think they're in a position where people who are actually social democrats for the most part, but maybe aren't super politically engaged, are probably gonna vote liberal because they're like afraid of conservatives or something, and people who are further to the left aren't gonna be voting NDP either. So then the NDP are kind of at a strange place where like most people aren't gonna be voting for them, even if they're the party that they like align with most. I guess like strongly.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the interesting thing is the NDP are up in the polls 23%
Yeah,
voting
no, I saw that.
intention. So it definitely seems like they're somewhat basically looking at the situation potentially. But the way I see it with like the NDP as a whole is basically that like a lot of the NDP seems to be bragging that basically liberals take their policy. But if you think about it, if you're actually to the left, wouldn't you want policies that are genuinely challenging capital and genuinely changing society to the point where the liberals wouldn't want to touch it for the 10-foot pole?
Yeah,
Like that's the whole thing is basically like, for example, pushing like the NDP pushed for like the wage subsidy, and then the NDP is like, oh no, they're taking advantage of the wage subsidy. Who could have seen this coming except for literally everyone?
right.
It's like it's just so frustrating, really. Like, look, I'll be honest. Basically, in terms of where I'm politically, like, I'm going to be joining the Young Communist League soon.
Right.
So basically, my political leanings are basically very to the left.
No, I
So
understand. Yeah, no.
my critiques are probably obviously going to be different than the ones that maybe a lot of people will make. But like, yeah,
And my understanding is that the jump in the polls for the NDP, and I might be wrong about this. I don't quote me on this necessarily. My understanding is that the jump in the poll, like to the 23% that one poll was saying, and like 20 was the other poll that I saw. Um, I think it's because the Green Party isn't doing well. I think it's mostly people jumping from the Green Party, not from liberals. But maybe I might be wrong about that. I need to fact check that. But I'm pretty sure that aren't the Green Party down quite a bit?
yeah, no, I think you're right there because I mean they brought in Annemie Paul, and basically she's really just a status quo kind of figure. So she's going to really pose no threat to the status quo at all. And really, like, it's actually a funny point, basically, because I left the party to go essentially vote in the Green Party race. And I just found basically that was the point where I really that was the point of radicalization for me, where I went from social democrat who was extremely angry and frustrated with the party to I finally just went and joined and became a communist.
Right.
Like that's where I finally like went and changed, because I think a particular flashpoint for me was the foreign policy debate. I was looking at the foreign policy debate, and at that point I was like, every single one of these candidates' foreign policy is not good. And like that's the thing for me, I think, I guess, and I can bring it to a bigger point in general, is that I feel like foreign policy is the biggest, really fastest point of radicalization. That you can bring someone from the center or even the center right all the way to the left. You can bring them there really fast, because like foreign policy, I think it was, I don't know who said it because this isn't my original words, but essentially like foreign policy dictates domestic policy,
Right.
in essence. So once people understand basically what you're doing in the world and the foreign policy of the world, basically then people start to understand how the politics actually work. That's the reason why like you see basically the Canadian media working overtime to just never cover foreign policy in any critical manner. And basically, in my opinion, like media in Canada manufactures consent for Canadian imperialism. Because basically, if people grasped what we were doing as a country and what we've done as a country, basically, like we aren't the peacekeeping heroes. Like we committed war crimes of peacekeeping. And like
sure.
in Somalia, for example, basically, we are not like the heroes that people want to make us out to be. And if people grasp the true reality of what we've done as a country from day one, then I think you'd very quickly see a mass movement to the left in this country. And that's why there's such a hard push to prevent that.
No, I think you're 100% right about that. It's like I personally, I grew up in East Africa, in Uganda when I was a kid. Then I moved to Kenya. My parents are Christian missionaries actually, um, and that is a big part of what pushed me to left politics. Is that I saw the way that, especially at the time, America was exploiting these countries and was, like I fundamentally wanted to see the developing world be developed and improve. And I realized, first of all, that all the presidents and leaders in African countries that had done the best at doing that were all socialists. Were all like Nelson Mandela and Thomas Sankara and
Yeah,
Rotumba. Like
Sankara. Sankara is brilliant. Yeah.
they were all, and even like even though I don't think that this person, like even like Gaddafi in Libya, who I'm not necessarily going to advocate for all of his policies, but I think that even Gaddafi in Libya improved literacy rates by so much and improved general democracy by so much. And
Yeah, everyone actually had a home there. Like there was free university.
yeah,
Like Gaddafi wasn't perfect. I don't think anyone on the left's going to try to say Gaddafi's perfect, but he did a hell of a lot.
and he was
Did
a hell of a
of
lot
good.
better than the current civil war that's killing thousands of Libyans right
Yeah,
now.
there's slavery like
Like,
happening, ongoing. Like it's
and that's what really radicalized again isn't necessarily a term that I like to use but regardless, that's really what pushed me quite far into leftist politics and got me exploring, and like got me reading theory actually and reading like Angela Davis and reading political stuff as well. Is that
oh, have you read Prenti by any chance?
Parenti? I haven't. I've watched his lectures on YouTube. I know he's like everyone's. I know people love Parenti, but
Prenti's great. He really is.
I really want to. It's definitely on my list. I'm quite a bad reader. I don't know why. It's funny for someone who I write quite a bit. Obviously, I love journalism, but like reading, I'm just a bad reader. I don't know why. I'm just bad at like paying attention. So you should listen to audiobooks instead of reading.
Yeah, actually, that's how I read Parenti. Honestly, I just used a text to speech thing and found one of those free online PDFs
Oh damn.
of the book. So
yeah, I might see if it's like on Audible or whatever. Just because I want to
you can
give
actually
like
find
Jeff
one of
Bezos more
them.
money.
I know basically, I think it was Black Shirts and Reds. That one is
Yeah.
on YouTube. That one is on YouTube. You don't even have to
Black
use
Shirts
that
in
machine.
Red. Let me, oh yeah, dude. Write it down. Black Shirts in Red. Is that what you said? I'll write it
Correctamundo?
down so I don't forget it.
All right.
Sorry.
All right, no worries. I'll just grab a quick drink.
Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Let me just turn off my mic for a quick second.
Yeah, no problem. Alright, perfect.
Yeah, sorry, I just hadn't had my morning coffee yet.
No problem whatsoever, bro. Yeah, that's what really got me really interested into starting reading more political theory and reading political, I guess, like people like I wouldn't consider someone like Angela Davis to be theory, but I think in some ways like learning about intersectionality and stuff. Is that growing up in the developing world, I couldn't believe like the type of, and it's how I often describe the problems that I have with capitalism to people. Is I think people are quite understanding of like how we exploit the developing world. I think people understand that people in the developing world need a certain amount of money to survive. So countries like Canada and America go there and exploit their labor and give them the minimum possible amount of money, and then get like all the product and then resell those products for such a high price back to the people who they stole their resources from. And that's why the developing world stays in this cycle of poverty, because that's so hard to escape when every country in the world's doing that to you, or not every country, but like imperial powers doing that to you. I think people fundamentally understand imperialism like that. And that's what's happening with our wage labor too, obviously. Like it's the same thing. In some ways at least. But
yeah,
sorry,
for sure. Yeah. I find one of the biggest things about it is there's this book, I think it's by Walter Rodney, that is an absolutely terrific read, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa.
Right.
Because Africa has resources, basically, and I think it was Sankara who, and this is yet again not an exact quote, but the general idea he said is basically that we don't need like your aid or we don't need these little things. You just need the necessary tools for us to basically survive on our own. And that's basically what the colonial powers and imperialist powers do, tend to, at least from what I've always seen, do with Africa, is basically they'll give them a little bit, but then they'll set it up and design even a lot of the aid in a way that conditions further exploitation.
Yeah.
And so, like, for example, like in terms of, I've mentioned a lot of books, but Canada and Africa by Yvonne Glaire really is a terrific book, and that kind of details what's happened even recently. But I also wrote about how Canada plays a key part in AFRICOM. That's the United States Africa Command. And so basically, that's been a key part in like North American imperialism in Africa. There's been active imperialism. I mean, Canada
Oh,
For
absolutely.
example, and I'm hoping this piece might get published soon, I wrote about how basically Canada, basically in terms of Libya, the Libya campaign, the one they bombed Libya, basically destroyed the country and sent it into civil war. Canada led that. Canada led that that effort, basically to bomb Libya, to crush the country there, to basically cause chaos. And so, like,
Yeah.
we really aren't the good guys. And so, it's just, yeah. I mean, especially it's quite fascinating. I think basically you have quite a very very unique perspective, especially growing up in Africa.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't. My perspective is obviously tinged a little bit by the fact that I am Canadian. Um, the perspective of a Kenyan or Ugandan is obviously they have a far better understanding of their current situation and the poverty
Oh
that
yeah,
exists
of
in their
course,
country than I
of
ever
course,
could.
of course.
Even though I lived there for 11 years, from when I was 7 to 18. So like for me personally, it seems like I understand it quite well. It might be like the best thing that I understand, but compared to someone who's grown up in that culture, they understand their exploitation a lot more um concretely than I do, obviously. But I think
Yeah,
that
no doubt there. One of the things basically there, I guess the inspiration for the article I ended up doing kind of around Canada and AFRICOM was there's this great webinar by Black Alliance for Peace. And I think Margaret Kimberly is a must read in terms of basically Africa politics and so just so much in general. The work that she does is terrific. But one of the things they kind of emphasize there really in terms of like the webinars, obviously in terms of Canada, AFRICOM's role, but there is like a they actually highlighted basically the African voices, the voice of people resisting on the ground. And that was really good to see because I think basically, obviously one of the problems tends to be that basically like certain voices do end up getting highlighted over others. So it is really important to actually prioritize at the end of the day the voice of people that have the lived experience and have gone through and are actively dealing with imperialism at this
I
current
agree
moment.
100%. Yeah, and like so I went to boarding school in Kenya, and my boarding school is a missionary school with a mostly white student population and all white teachers from America completely. It's a colonial establishment. Um and it's actively obviously doing imperialism and colonialism. I mean, so obviously in the same way that every single school in Canada is also an imperial establishment, obviously, because it's on
Yeah.
land that doesn't belong to them, and so on and so forth. Um, but it's funny because this probably doesn't come as any surprise, but the majority of like my American classmates and teachers were all the most religious conservative people you can imagine. Like they were all like Republicans because of abortion and Republicans because they didn't like gay marriage. Like they were like the most ideologically driven conservatives you can imagine. So they obviously, I don't know, like even just seeing like that perspective on Africa made like their perspective on Africa made me feel that like as like even from quite a young age that if we keep this current thinking about the developing world, and this goes for South America and Latin America as well, if we keep this neoliberal like understanding of like the developing world, they're never going to be developed. Like there has to like there's in my opinion if like this exploitation keeps going, then it just like keeps catching in like this cycle that's impossible to break out of, and that really made me like start looking for other solutions.
Yeah, no doubt there. I can absolutely understand that. Yeah, no, I mean, like, really, the current system and the way it is, it's designed to keep people in poverty. I mean, like, you look at the role of the International Monetary Fund, basically as a historically like institution of really controlling so many
Yeah.
of these countries by doing debt diplomacy against them.
Yeah.
Like especially like you look at think of Latin America, you think of basically everywhere the IMF touches, basically turns to debt.
Yeah.
And so basically this model of it was basically because I read Lenin's on imperialism basically a few months ago, and it kind of affirmed what I already had an idea of, which is like modern imperialism really isn't just invading a country. Modern imperialism is basically putting a ton of sanctions on them, putting a trade blockade on them, politically interfering, funding opposition groups, basically through things like the National Endowment for Democracy, or these other kind of similar institutions in Canada, and basically claiming that these are basically democracy people, or as such, basically fomenting destabilization essentially
Right.
within a country, basically. And at its core, you apply these together, and basically you have a total war. You have a total war on a country. But
Mhm.
I think the problem with like the left's understanding of imperialism in general is really that people think of imperialism as just invading a place.
Yeah.
And basically, I think, and I don't know if this has happened to an exact degree in Africa. I'll admit that's not
No,
the
yeah.
best my area of expertise, which I want to kind of build, but you don't have that happen immediately.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's places around the world basically where this has happened. I mean, you think of the most easy one, I think most people can agree on. You think of Venezuela. Venezuela,
yeah.
like you think it's probably the most one that pretty much everyone can agree on. I mean, you look at what's happening, right? You essentially have a total war on them, and so yeah, it's really just, I guess, going on a tangent, which I think I have gone on a tangent, is
No,
the
it's
key
fine.
point
Okay.
is getting people to understand what imperialism is, to understand what it's doing in this current point in age, basically is really key. Because I think once people understand how imperialism has changed, how it's been modernized, like you think of neocolonialism instead of colonialism now, basically, at that point, I think basically you see change might begin to happen, and you might see these kind of mass movements pop up. And I mean, I want to shout out the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, which I connected with I connect a fair bit with Yvonne Glaire and Arnold August, who are
Mhm.
fellows at that institute. Like they're doing that kind of work to try to get people to understand about foreign policy. And I guess in a way, the Canada Files is also doing that work too, by basically just covering it every day. But yeah, people are propagandized by our media
Yeah.
institutions, really, that work desperately needs to be done.
Yeah, no, I think that anti-imperialism is perhaps the most important stance that we can make in the 21st century. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about the Venezuelan election and obviously the way that the West has reacted to the election with Guaido not running and everything and all that happened.
Oh man, seeing Guaido basically be out of there is it's a lovely sight. It's a lovely sight to see. Is the way I'd put it. Yeah, no, I think basically, obviously Venezuela isn't perfect, realistically, and I
Yeah.
think basically, personally, like basically, you have a case where basically the capitalists and especially the figures in Venezuelan opposition are openly declaring war against the country.
Hmm.
Like it is like you look at what Guaido is doing. Like Guaido is literally a traitor. He is a traitor, basically, to Venezuela. Like what he's doing, pushing sanctions, stealing billions of dollars.
What
Like
was
in the
that?
UK High Court, right? Basically, they stole basically through a UK court ruling $1.2 billion in gold. They basically Canada played a key role in basically taking Citgo, the Venezuelan basically oil service abroad. And basically that funding was going to basically Venezuelans abroad for fuel subsidies and for basically people who had like very, very specific diseases and very specific health problems that cost high amount of money. These subsidies and funds were going to these people. And basically you have Guaido coming in, stealing this money, basically, and then using it to fund basically advisors and a lot of these figures to basically try to topple the government. So you have basically a case where you have someone like Guaido who's a literal traitor. And basically, to me, the most remarkable thing, I guess, with Maduro is that he hasn't actually done more to actually deal with a Guaido or deal with that. So I'm very glad about the victory at the end of the day, because seeing the Chavista forces end up basically winning this election, and basically the U.S.'s really attempts to U.S. and I say Canada. I want to separate those two because Canada is definitely a conscientious player in imperialism. Basically, it doesn't surprise me really that they refuse to acknowledge the results of the election.
Right.
Pompeo did it before. Then basically Champagne did it. The foreign minister of Canada, he did it. I think it was the day of the elections or the day before.
Yep.
And it doesn't really surprise me.
No.
Like, Canada's played that kind of big role. It's desperately not wanted, basically, the Maduro government. I mean, like, reaching back a bit, like Stephen Harper back in 2013 even basically said it was a great day when Chavez died. Like basically, Chavez, like Harper was practically celebrating when Chavez died. Like you got it. Like the Canadian imperialism basically hates Venezuela, and so it's a great relief to win, but it's also no surprise that Canada and like America absolutely have zero desire to see Venezuela really continue in a sovereign manner.
Yeah, and I hope that obviously the sanctions on Venezuela from the American government and from the European Union have been um highly damaging to the people of Venezuela. Um in terms of like everything. And I think that yeah, it's hard. It's obviously Venezuela is not a perfect government. Maduro
Of
is
course
not.
not. Like obviously
Yeah,
there's imperfections in any government. I think that's it's not like a crime to admit that
no.
nothing's absolutely perfect. So
And Maduro is no Chavez.
yeah,
Um
no. I think we can agree on both fronts there. I think basically I'd like to see Maduro actually lean more into like the socialist policies and lean more into that. Basically,
yeah.
I think he's been way too conciliatory to a lot of these forces, and that's caused so much of the unrest. Really,
And I think that he's
he's
had to
been playing too
make.
nice.
I
So.
don't necessarily blame him for this either. I mean,
No, of course you
but
can't blame him because you're under imperialist pressure,
yeah,
you're under aggression, you're afraid of a potential invasion. So I'm not going to say like Maduro's terrible.
yeah.
Absolutely not.
He's
Basically,
made because he's definitely made cuts to some social services to further fund like the police and like further fund the military and stuff. Um, which obviously isn't great for the Venezuelan people's material conditions. It's hard to, and obviously I don't support that necessarily. I would obviously want more social safety nets for the Venezuelan people, but it's also hard when your country is under this much scrutiny to not
yeah,
feel like the
it's
answer is
basically a
to
constant threat of invasion. It's a constant threat of subversion. It's like you can understand it. You don't have to be happy about it, but
exactly.
you grasp why you do it. I mean, like for example, if I was put in a similar situation to him, like basically I wouldn't want to basically fund the police. I'd be wanting to defund these things. I'd be wanting to basically put it into these kind of programs because at the end of the day, the people matter the most. But at the same time, you can also grasp why you don't want to get your country invaded by the U.S.
No,
I
for
mean,
sure.
look at how much the work they had to do to escape the iron fist of the United States and Canada. So
And obviously, there are obviously conservatives in Venezuela. There's conservatives everywhere in the world.
yeah, there is obviously. Yeah.
Neoconservatism exists everywhere in the world, but in general, um, the people of Venezuela are quite inspiring to me. I think they're very revolutionary and they're very passionate and they have a good understanding about like what's good for one another. And I do like Venezuela quite a lot, and I'm quite inspired in general by the people of Venezuela. I think that they um in the face of adversity have done quite a lot of good, and obviously there's like a lot of solidarity that I have there with them and everything. I think that um I want their success really at the end of the day, and I don't think that Guaido would have given them that. I think that Guaido would have obviously opened the country up to far more U.S. imperialism and would have opened the country up to um depleting of natural resources and etc. That would be better used to profit the Venezuelan people.
Yeah, for sure. I think we can agree there. So.
Yeah, and it's funny because I feel like it's easy to I think that growing up, I thought that when I was younger, I thought that um Canada must have a pretty a good might not be the right word, but and they do have a more hospitable approach towards communism, or at least towards socialist governments, than the United States does. But it's very marginal. I think that like growing up and seeing like the relationship that or obviously in the past it was history at this point, but like seeing the friendships that Pierre Elliott Trudeau had with Fidel Castro, I kind of thought that like naively that oh Canada must support it's almost like to say but Canada must have some sort of solidarity with these movements in Latin America. Um so it is definitely a sad realization growing up and realizing that really Canada's imperial foreign policy is very much so connected to what's going on in the United States.
Oh yeah, one of the most interesting things is basically, and this is the nice thing about having basically kind of knowing Yvon Glair very well, who is a terrific author. Basically, he kind of linked me to some stuff when I was working on a piece around what was it now? It was one I released recently. It was on the Five Eyes. It was on Five Eyes and those
Right.
documents.
Yeah, I saw that.
Basically, one of the most interesting things I found is I don't think I put it in as part of the article, but the reason why Canada actually maintained good relations with Cuba was actually at the U.S.'s behest to basically get intelligence on them.
Oh, really?
That was the original reason. That was the original reason why basically Canada did that. It wasn't even a positive intent. It was actually just for intelligence and basically those purposes to basically spy on them.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely this real problematic mythology, but I can totally understand. Like I think we've come from relatively similar situations of thinking that things are doing well. You think maybe there's some hope there, but eventually you slowly come to this crushing realization that, oh no, we're not the good guys.
No.
And then you start to be able to act. And it's better to basically have that reality checked and then act than basically be deluded the entire time. So it's at least better in that way.
I want to be a little bit conscious of your time. I don't know if you are restricted at all right now. If you have somewhere to get to, I don't want to keep you too long. If you're,
I think it probably wouldn't be a terrible idea to wrap up in like next minute, like in a few minutes. That would be good. Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess like the last thing I wanted to just ask you about really quickly, since I'm just starting this series, I basically just want to interview people like I've done with you and talk to other people on the Canadian left, because I think that you and I both agree on this, that more coverage of leftists in Canada can only be a good thing. I was interested if there's anyone who you know of who I should maybe reach out to and talk to, or anyone who are interested in the Canadian left. Because I'm not as well. I don't really know the. I'm not as well situated on Twitter to know people as well who would be interesting to talk to. So I wonder if you had any suggestions for people who I should reach out to.
Sure. I think basically, like for example, Yvonne Glaire or Arnold August are probably going to always be solid guests. I'm trying to think on top of my head. A really interesting one of someone who's actually worked within the industry before. I'd recommend Khan Juned, I believe it is, or Khan Juned or Juned Khan. I always mess up his name, but it's one of the two. Sorry. But he's definitely like a really interesting one because he worked within the journalism industry. He was actually able to like institute some left stuff because the left seems to be a lot stronger in Quebec. Basically in terms of at least media, in terms of presence in the media.
Oh, really?
There, which is one of the most fascinating things I've kind of learned over time. I mean, if you want to learn a lot about China, I'd say, for example, like, I mean, obviously, shout out personally the Canadian Foreign Policy Files, like bi-weekly podcast. We did a special episode on Canada-China relations. But a good guest on China would be either William Gingwei Dare. He's a good author, and he appeared on that podcast episode, so he can talk a lot about Canada-China relations and kind of detail that down. I would also recommend if you look, it's a bit of an American source, but he's really, really good. I'd recommend it's Bay Area 415 on Twitter. I'd suggest maybe trying to reach out to him, maybe see if he'd be up to appear on the podcast and podcast stream, of course.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, but there's definitely a lot of terrific people. But I'd say if you wanted to start off there, if you talk to those people as the first few ones, you'd be in a very good spot. So.
Okay, well, thank you so much for Aidan. Thank you so much for this interview, for agreeing to this interview with me. Thank you for your time. I've had lots of good time chatting with you, and maybe we'll do this again sometime. This was lots of fun.
Yeah, sure. Just want to mention, of course, that if people want to support the work, basically, of the Canada Files, there is a Patreon, patreon.com/the Canada Files. Obviously, as I mentioned, that specifically goes to the writers, editors, figures within the site. And the personal Patreon, patreon.com/Aidan Jonah. That one's in terms of the work that I do. Obviously, support there would be great. But in terms of the Canada Files, Twitter, it's the Canada Files. And obviously, it's pretty obvious there. And newsletter. I would suggest people basically, if they want to see the Canada Files content every single day, just go to the Canada Files. It should be the first thing that pops when you go to the article. Sign up for the newsletter. You'll get it, basically the content delivered to you every single day. And one last thing, actually, Twitch. I do have a Twitch where the Canada Files live stream on politics and foreign policy is going to be happening. I had some technical issues last time, but now that exams are done for me, I'm hoping to start doing that from next week onwards. So if people want to go to twitch.tv/Aidan Jonah, follow me there. I will be streaming soon. I think there's a lot of things, so I'll
And
stop
when
there.
I upload this video to YouTube, I'll include links down below in the description to all of your social media and the Canada files and to your Twitch and everything. So people
Yeah,
can
that sounds
check down
great.
there.
But honestly, thanks for giving me a chance to chat with you. It was nice.
Yeah, no, this was lots of fun. Thank you so much.
All right.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you. Okay, perfect. So that was Aidan Jonah, the editor-in-chief and the founder of the Canada Files. I had a really good chat with him. I was really happy we got to do that. And I'm going to be uploading this video to YouTube. I'm going to be uploading clips on on TikTok and on Instagram. And yeah, I'm really excited about what I'm going to be doing here. Hopefully in the future, I'm going to reach out to some of those people who Aidan recommended and talk to more voices from the Canadian left. I think it's really important, and I'm really excited to get to do this. So that's it for my stream today. Thank you so much for joining me. It really means the world. Hope you guys all have the best day. And yeah, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, etc. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.